Malcolm Reed walked into court for a routine property matter, calm, quiet, and polite. But just minutes later, a white officer slammed him to the floor and cuffed him right in front of the judge. No one asked why. No one stood up. What they didn't know was that Malcolm wasn't just another black man in a suit. What happens when the man they tried to humiliate turns out to outrank them all? Like, share and stay with us. This story only gets deeper. The courthouse buzzed with the soft hum of routine, a shuffle of papers' heels against marble, quiet whispers before hearings began. It should have been an ordinary Thursday morning. But then Malcolm Reed walked in. A tall black man in a tailored navy suit, carrying nothing but a leather folio, calm, composed, focused. He didn't look like trouble. He looked like someone who'd handled bigger rooms than this one. He approached the security desk with the quiet confidence of a man used to following the rules. "Good morning," he said, holding out his ID. "I'm here for Department 4A. Property transfer." Behind the desk stood Officer Cole Maddox, white stocky, built like a bouncer with a badge he wore like a threat. He glanced at the ID, but his eyes never left Malcolm's face. "You here alone?" Maddox asked, his voice low, deliberate. "Yes. Is that a problem?" "That depends. What's in the folder?" "Title documents. Deed affidavit. I can open it if you like." Maddox didn't answer. He took a slow step forward, crossing into Malcolm's personal space. Close enough to make a point. "You nervous?" Malcolm met his eyes steady. "No, sir. You look it." "I'm not." And just like that, something flicked behind Maddox's eyes, like he needed that answer to be yes. Like he needed a reason. "Hands behind your back," Maddox ordered suddenly. The room froze. "Excuse me," Malcolm asked, not moving. "For what?" "You're acting suspicious." I said, "Hands behind your back. I've given you my ID, my purpose, and my documents. That's not suspicious." But Maddox was already reaching for the cuffs. "Turn around now, or I'll make you," he barked. Around them, people stopped walking. One by one, heads turned. A soft gasp echoed from the back. Malcolm sighed low and controlled and turned. The clink of the cuffs rang out louder than it should have in a place built for justice. He didn't resist, didn't plead, just said calmly, "This is a mistake." Maybe Maddox smirked, tightening the cuffs. "But I don't take chances with angry men in nice suits." And that's when a phone lifted. Emma Lennox, white 22 journalism student, was already recording. She didn't know Malcolm, but something about the scene, the silence, the tension, the imbalance told her this wasn't right. She caught every second. At the front desk, Rosa Delgado. The court clerk watched with growing disbelief. She'd seen Maddox flex his authority before, but this felt different. Malcolm hadn't raised his voice, hadn't broken any rule. He'd just walked in. Black, educated, and confident. Rosa locked eyes with Malcolm for just a second. She expected fear, but all she saw was focus. Like he wasn't surprised at all. "This is on record, you know," Malcolm said, voice still calm. "There are cameras." Maddox leaned in. "You think I care?" And that was it. Maddox yanked Malcolm forward, parading him toward the holding room like a trophy. The courtroom was dead silent, save for the click of boots on tile and the distant hum of the AC. "You've got 5 minutes before I file resisting arrest," Maddox growled. "I haven't resisted a thing," Malcolm said, "but you just might regret this." The sentence wasn't a threat. It wasn't angry. It was quiet, cold, certain. Emma swallowed hard as her camera kept rolling. Rosa reached for her phone but froze. She glanced at the hallway monitor. No supervisor. No backup. Just her, watching a man get humiliated for existing. Maddox pushed Malcolm through the steel door and disappeared inside. And just like that, it was over. But the room hadn't moved. Like everyone knew this wasn't just another courthouse incident. Something bigger had just been set in motion. No one could name it yet, but they felt it deep in their gut. A fire had just been lit. They thought he'd start yelling. They waited for him to scream, to beg, to throw out a name. Maybe a lawyer, maybe a politician, someone with enough pull to undo what had just been done in that lobby. But Malcolm Reed said nothing. He sat alone on the cold bench of holding room 3, hands still cuffed behind his back, his breathing slow and deliberate. There was no fear in his eyes, no anger either, just stillness, like he was listening to something deeper than the chaos around him. Officer Maddox stood outside the door chuckling with a younger cop. "See that?" Maddox said. "That's the silence of guilt. They always go quiet when they know they're caught." "Yeah," the rookie added like a kid with his hand in the cookie jar. But nothing about Malcolm felt like guilt. It felt like calculation. Back at the front desk, Rosa Delgado kept glancing toward the hallway. The scene kept replaying in her mind like a broken loop, Malcolm's calm voice, the cuffs, the eerie silence afterward. She couldn't shake it. At first, she told herself it wasn't her business, but then she did something she hadn't done in over a decade working in the courthouse. She made coffee, and then on second thought, filled a plastic cup with cold water instead. When she walked into the holding hallway, Maddox wasn't there. She paused at the open cell window and pushed the cup through the slot. Malcolm turned slowly. Their eyes met through the small gap in the door. He gave the faintest nod, no smile, no words, just gratitude, without a single sound. And somehow that silent gesture hit Rosa harder than any protest could have. It wasn't submission. It wasn't fear. It was control. Across town, Dion Reed's hands were shaking as she checked her phone again. 3 missed calls. No answer. No message. She wasn't the type to panic easily. She was a nurse, after all, used to emergencies, trained to stay steady when others couldn't. But this was different. Malcolm was never late, never unreachable. And when her 4th call went to voicemail, her stomach dropped. She stared out the window of her hospital break room, whispering to no one, "Please don't let this be what I think it is." Back at the courthouse, Rosa approached Chief Salter in his office. Salter was in his late 50s, white-mustached, proud of his decades in uniform. The kind of man who measured threat levels with his gut and rarely trusted anything newer than a fax machine. Sir Rosa began cautiously, "I think we might have overreacted." Salter didn't look up from his desk. "That man hasn't said a word since we put him in cuffs. That's not innocent behavior, that's calculated." "But he was calm," Rosa insisted. "He explained why he was here. He had ID, legal papers. He never raised his voice. And that's what worries me," Salter said, finally looking at her. "The really dangerous ones are the quiet ones. They think, they wait, then they strike." Rosa's lips tightened. "Or maybe he's just quiet because he's tired of being humiliated." Salter's tone hardened. "Are you questioning my officer? I'm questioning what we're trying to protect," she said just above a whisper. Back in holding room 3, the door finally opened. Chief Salter entered, followed by Maddox. Malcolm remained seated. Salter stood over him, hands on hips. "We ran your ID. You're not flagged, not armed, and so far not charged. Yet." Malcolm didn't move. Salter leaned closer. "You've got a chance here. Cooperate. Tell us what you're doing here and we can all go home." Silence. Maddox chuckled behind him. "Told you. He's too proud to talk." But then Malcolm did. Just one sentence, one quiet line delivered with unsettling calm. "I won't sue," he said, "if you stop while you still can." Salter blinked. The room dropped 10 degrees. Maddox frowned. "Is that a threat?" Malcolm looked up at him straight in the eye. "No, it's a favor." And with that, he looked away again back to the wall as if the conversation was already over. Salter stared at him for a long second, then wordlessly walked out. Maddox followed, jaw clenched. They didn't realize it yet, but the man they thought was no one had just offered them mercy. It started with a shaky phone camera, A white college student named Leah Dunn, second-year poli-sci major, had been standing just a few feet away from the courthouse doors when it happened. She didn't mean to record it. Not at first. But something about the officer's tone, that sharp-clipped voice, made her thumb tap the red circle. In less than 2 minutes, she'd captured the whole thing, Malcolm Reed calm and composed, stating his name. Officer Maddox interrupting. Then the sudden unnecessary force, the cuffs, the tension, the silence. Leah uploaded it with a short caption. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't violent. He was just standing there. Within 6 hours, the hashtag he was just standing there hit trending. By the end of the night, it was everywhere. Clips played on loop across social media, Instagram reels, Twitter reposts, reaction videos on YouTube. Malcolm's face confused, composed quietly, outraged became a symbol. People saw what Rosa had seen, a man punished not for what he did, but for who he was. And just like that, the court wasn't quiet anymore. Dionne Reed sat at the edge of her couch, phone pressed to her chest. She hadn't slept. When she finally saw the video, she froze. Her husband's posture, the humiliation, the way no one stepped in. Then the voice of the reporter kicked in. She says her husband had gone to court to finalize paperwork for a family inheritance, not to answer for a crime. Dionne's voice broke, but her words were steady when she went live that night. My husband, she said to the screen, wasn't resisting. He wasn't hiding. He came to do the right thing and was treated like a threat for showing up with dignity. She ended with one sentence that echoed across the country. You can't keep calling us dangerous just because we walk in proud. Inside the courthouse, tension hummed under the marble floor like electricity beneath wet wires. Rosa Delgado sat at her desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard. She had already answered 5 calls from reporters asking if she'd seen the arrest. She hadn't said a word. Now the head clerk, Mr. Thornley, stood over her with a voice like iron wrapped in honey. We're not making public statements, Rosa. That includes you. I haven't spoken to anyone, she replied. And let's keep it that way. He left her with a gentle pat on the desk. But the message landed hard. Silence was expected. Her gut twisted. Across the room, Officer Jared Kim, one of the younger, more observant patrolmen, watched her closely. Something about Rosa's expression didn't sit right, and something about the video didn't either. He'd seen Maddox act tough before. Loud. Pushy. But this was different. Later that afternoon, Jared asked Maddox casually over break. Hey, that guy Reed. What's he booked for anyway? Maddox snorted. We'll figure it out. Give it time. Jared frowned. Wait, you cuffed him before the charge? Maddox didn't answer, just walked off with a shrug. That silence said more than he meant it to. Meanwhile, pressure built outside. News outlets split into 2 noisy camps. One side defended law enforcement, pointing to body language historical patterns, possible suspicious behavior even in the absence of charges. The other side demanded answers, justice, and apology. Commentators fought live on air. Protesters started organizing, and the courthouse phone line didn't stop ringing. Back in the precinct, Chief Salter slammed a folder on his desk. We're not getting dragged into another PR nightmare, he snapped at Maddox. Then let's get ahead of it, Maddox said, teeth gritted. Give me time. I'll find something. Anything. Nobody's that clean. Salter stared at him. You better. Because if that man's record is spotless and this thing keeps snowballing, it won't just be you getting grilled. Maddox nodded once and turned to leave. He didn't say it out loud, but in his mind the mission was clear. Find dirt or fake it convincingly. That night, Jared sat in his cruiser with his laptop open watching the video again. Frame by frame. He paused on Malcolm's eyes just before the cuffs clicked. Not scared, not guilty, just disappointed, like he'd seen this all before. And suddenly Jared felt something he hadn't expected. shame. They say evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a badge and a smug little smile. That night, the precinct was quiet except for the low hum of fluorescent lights and the tap-tap of Maddox's boots echoing down the garage hallway. He moved like he belonged there, confident, arrogant. He passed the cameras with his head down and a hoodie pulled up not enough to draw suspicion, just enough to blur the frame. Then he stopped beside a sleek black Lincoln. Malcolm's car, still parked where the court staff had left it. He popped the trunk with a copied key fob. No hesitation, no flinch, just the smooth motion of someone who'd done something like this before. Inside the trunk, under a neatly folded jacket, he slid in a small, unregistered pistol wrapped in a police evidence bag. Next to it, he tucked a folder falsified records sealed in plastic. The name on top read, Malcolm Isaiah Reed. Inside fabricated priors, gang ties, a juvenile weapons charge. Enough to taint a reputation. Enough to shift the narrative. Enough to make the world say, maybe the cop wasn't wrong after all. Then he closed the trunk and walked away, whistling like nothing ever happened. The next morning, just after 9:00 a.m., 2 patrol officers knocked on Rosa's desk. Routine vehicle sweep, one of them said casually, since when she asked, frowning, since now. They didn't wait for approval. Within 10 minutes, Malcolm's car had been pulled into the side inspection lot. Cameras flashed. A drug dog circled twice, barked once, and sat. And just like that, they had cause. A minute later, one officer lifted the trunk. Another one whistled. Bingo. Gloves on, cameras rolling, they pulled the pistol and folder from the trunk and laid them out like trophies on the hood. It didn't take long for the news to spread. Malcolm said nothing. As he sat back in his holding cell, hands on his lap, not a single word left his mouth. No protest, no outrage, just a quiet breath and the same unreadable calm that had become his armor. One officer chuckled to another down the hall. Guess the internet spoke too soon, huh? Someone else added. Called it. Always something with these guys. But Malcolm's eyes, those eyes never wavered. Like he'd seen this script before. Like he knew how it ended. Meanwhile, in their home, Dion was falling apart. She stared at the headline on her phone. Unregistered weapon found in Reed's car. Claims of innocence questioned. No, she whispered. No way. But the seed was planted, and doubt has a way of growing fast when the soil is grief and confusion. She tried calling Malcolm again, straight to voicemail. She paced the room, then sat, then stood again. Could he have kept something from her? Some part of his past she never knew. The Malcolm she knew was gentle, methodical, unshakably principled. But what if... She didn't want to believe it. But the silence... It was eating her alive. Back in the courthouse, Rosa wasn't buying it. There was something off. She pulled up the security logs, her fingers trembling slightly. Not just hallway cams, she dove into the admin system logs, the ones that tracked badge swipes in the parking structure. She searched timestamps, the night before. One hit. Badge ID M. Maddox. Access time, 11:38 p.m. Her breath caught. That door wasn't supposed to be accessed at all after 9:00 p.m. She looked up slowly, eyes scanning the room. The other clerks moved like nothing was wrong, but Rosa knew something was very wrong. She copied the log and emailed it to herself, just in case. Meanwhile, Jared Kim was already 5 steps ahead. He hadn't slept much. After watching the video again and again, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the way this whole thing spiraled. The report didn't match the footage. The timing didn't make sense. And now this lucky discovery in Malcolm's car, too clean, too convenient. So while no one was looking, Jared slipped into the security room under the pretense of checking dispatch logs. He pulled the hallway camera from the garage, scrolled to 11:38 p.m., paused. There, a man in a hoodie. The frame was blurry, but the gait, the height, the shoulder build. It was Maddox. Jared exhaled slowly. He didn't copy the footage. Not yet. Instead, he encrypted it and moved it to a secure folder his own drive off network. He wasn't ready to go public. Not yet. Not until he was sure. But that night, as he sat alone in his cruiser watching the sun sink behind the courthouse, he whispered to himself, "If they're willing to plant a gun, what else are they hiding?" The call came in just after noon. Dion was grading essays in her modest office at Jefferson High when her phone buzzed. She answered without checking the ID, and the voice on the other end didn't waste a second. "Ms. Reed, this is Principal Wallace. I'm afraid we have to place you on administrative leave effective immediately." She froze. "Excuse me. Why, I'm sorry." "The school board received concerns about your husband's arrest. Allegations involving a weapon. It's just protocol while we investigate, but..." She didn't hear the rest. The air felt sucked out of the room. After the call ended, she sat in silence, staring at the framed wedding photo on her desk, Malcolm's arm around her, smiling gently like he always did. That smile had meant stability, trust. Now it felt like a stranger's face. That night, she walked the halls of their quiet home alone. Her eyes landed on the same wedding photo hung by the stairs. Slowly, she took it down. Her grip tightened, then, in a sudden snap, she hurled it to the floor. The glass shattered, echoing through the house. With trembling fingers, she called her mother. "Mama?" Her voice cracked. "Do you think it's possible I've been lied to for 10 years? There was a long pause. Her mother's voice came soft, steady. "I think it's possible you're scared. But don't confuse silence with betrayal. Sometimes silence protects more than it hides." But the doubt had already seeped into her bones. Meanwhile, back in his holding cell, Malcolm sat under a dim ceiling light. He hadn't called a lawyer, hadn't contacted his wife. His silence had become armor and prison. That evening, he finally picked up a pen and wrote a note on the back of a court pamphlet. "Dion, I can't explain, not yet. Not like you deserve. But please, wait for the end. M." At the courthouse, Rosa stared at her monitor long after everyone else had left. She couldn't shake the image of Malcolm, calm, restrained, utterly out of place in cuffs. Something was wrong. She inserted a flash drive, pulled up the internal surveillance logs, and began scrolling. There it was. Timestamp 6:27 a.m., 30 minutes before the so-called random car check. The footage showed Maddox alone approaching Malcolm's car. No supervisor, no paperwork, no hesitation. He popped the trunk like he'd done it 100 times and slid something inside, a sleek black object barely visible under his coat. Rosa gasped, her hand covering her mouth. She saved the clip, compressed it, and sent it to a secure email with no subject line. The message simply read, "Your husband's car was opened before the search. You should know." That night, Dion opened the anonymous email and clicked play. Her breath hitched as she watched Maddox on screen. Calm, calculated, illegal. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness this time, but from something deeper. Betrayal, not by her husband, but by a system she had once believed in. The next morning, she sat in silence, replaying the footage in her mind. Doubt still lingered, but it was cracking. Maybe Malcolm wasn't hiding from her. Maybe he was shielding her. Her phone buzzed, a number she didn't recognize. The message read, "We need to talk. JK." Later that day, Rosa stepped out through the back entrance of the courthouse, clutching a folder tight against her chest. Waiting by the alley was Officer Jared Kim. No uniform, no badge in sight. "I got your clip," he said quietly. "And I've been digging." Rosa's voice was barely a whisper. "If they find out I pulled that footage, they won't. Not if we're smart." He glanced around. Maddox is already trying to build a fake profile on Malcolm. He's reaching, and the harder he pushes, the more cracks show. Rosa took a shaky breath. "So what now?" Jared looked her dead in the eyes. "We get ahead of it. We find everything. We don't whisper the truth, we make it roar." She nodded. And somewhere deep inside the courthouse, a place built on order and silence, something began to stir. It wasn't a revolution. Not yet. But it was the start of a reckoning. The courtroom was unusually full that morning, not just with lawyers and press, but with energy. That tense, invisible kind of electricity that hangs right before something big breaks. It was the preliminary hearing. Malcolm sat calmly at the defense table in his gray blazer, hands folded, eyes fixed forward. He hadn't said a word all morning, and yet every camera in the room was already angled at him. On the other side, Officer Maddox stood just inside the witness box, his posture stiff, chin tilted up slightly like he still thought he was in control. Then the prosecutor dropped a photo on the projector. A grainy surveillance still. Malcolm outside a suburban home just a few feet from the porch. The caption underneath read, "Taken 2 nights before arrest near Officer Maddox's private residence." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The prosecutor turned. "Ladies and gentlemen, this wasn't some random courthouse incident. This man was casing a cop's home, planning something. He was dangerous long before that morning." Zara Fields, Malcolm's attorney, didn't flinch. She stood slowly, heels echoing in the silent room, and adjusted her glasses with an almost casual grace. "Your Honor," she began, "may I request access to the metadata attached to this photograph?" The judge blinked. The metadata. Zara turned to the screen. Every digital photo contains a digital fingerprint when it was taken, where it was taken, even what device captured it. If we could pull that now. There was a long pause as the judge sighed and motioned to the clerk. A tech assistant was brought in. Minutes passed, tension mounting. And then... It says, the original image was captured 4 months ago, and at a different location entirely. Metadata has been stripped and replaced. Maddox's jaw tightened. You could practically hear it click. Zara raised an eyebrow, calm as ever. "So, unless Mr. Reed was capable of time travel, I'd suggest we consider this evidence inadmissible." The courtroom buzzed again, and for the first time since his arrest, Malcolm allowed the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, more like acknowledgement. The judge narrowed her eyes at the prosecution, clearly annoyed. But that wasn't the end. As the hearing broke for recess, Jared Kim stepped into the hallway with something more. He met Zara just outside the court chamber, slipped her a drive. This, he whispered, is from the security cam 3 blocks from Malcolm's apartment. Maddox was caught walking toward Malcolm's car at 11:47 p.m., the night before the discovery. Zara blinked. "Are you sure it's clean time-stamped? Angles solid. No tampering." Zara nodded, took the drive, and tucked it inside her coat. Back inside the courthouse, Maddox's name was starting to stir louder, just not in the way he was used to. At her desk upstairs, Rosa clicked send on the internal complaint form. The subject line read, "Violation of conduct. Officer C. Maddox. Evidence planting allegation." She hesitated before hitting submit. Then she exhaled and did it anyway. 2 hours later, she was called into the administrator's office. The conversation was short and sharp. "Rosa, you've always been a reliable employee. We'd hate to see you walk away from all that." "I didn't say I was walking," she replied calmly. The supervisor smiled thinly. "No, but complaints like that tend to go hand in hand with career changes." Back in the newsroom, Nathan Moore, reporter for the Jackson Ledger, had been following the case since the footage of Malcolm's arrest had first gone viral. At first, he'd leaned into the angle most media took courthouse disturbance refusal to comply suspect under question. But something had shifted. Too many leaks. Too many contradictions. Now Nathan sat in front of a timeline. On one side, Malcolm's quiet schedule, his asset transfer appointment, and his sudden arrest. On the other, Maddox's unauthorized access logs, doctored evidence, and unexplained midnight activity. He opened his next article with 5 words. "Something about this doesn't fit." And that's all it took. Within hours, a new hashtag began trending online. Not started by a celebrity, not pushed by bots, but by ordinary people who had seen enough. We see you, Maddox. A photo of Rosa, blurry and grainy as she walked out of court, began making the rounds, too captioned. She spoke up. Would you? The shift had begun. And though Malcolm still hadn't said much of anything, the world was finally starting to listen. It started with a single clip. No caption, no commentary, just the harsh echo of skin against skin and the sound of a man who refused to flinch. The video hit the internet like a thunderclap. In the grainy footage, Officer Cole Maddox stood in a dim holding cell towering over Malcolm Reed, who was seated, hands cuffed behind him. No resistance, no words, just quiet stillness, then smack. A hard slap across Malcolm's face. He didn't even blink. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw tightening only slightly. The video lasted 20 seconds. It was enough. By noon, "He hit him" was trending. By sundown, the clip had aired on 4 national news outlets. And by morning, the conversation had changed. "This isn't about protocol anymore," a commentator said on cable news. "This is cruelty. On camera. No excuses." Another voice, more pointed. "What kind of system fears a silent man so much it tries to beat the truth out of him?" That quote was the headline on Nathan Moore's latest piece, Why the Silence of One Man Terrifies the System. Across the city, the courthouse felt different now. Inside, Rosa packed her small box in silence. A sticky note on her desk read, "HR wants to see you by 10. There was no surprise in her expression, just a quiet, exhausted kind of knowing. She'd refused to stay silent. And in places like this, that came with a cost. Later that week, Rosa appeared in a late-night interview. Her face-shadowed voice digitally altered, but her words were unmistakable. "It's not just one bad cop. The rot goes deeper. Maddox did what he did because he knew he'd be protected." And Malcolm, the host, asked. He never yelled, never cursed, never even asked for a lawyer. He just sat there like he knew something was coming, like he knew the truth would show up before anyone else could bury it. Meanwhile, Jared Kim was staring down his own fear. Someone had slashed his tires 2 nights in a row. An anonymous voicemail told him to stay out of business, that ain't yours. But that morning, he stood in the parking lot of the FBI field office, holding a USB drive that could take down a dozen careers. He took a breath, walked inside, and handed it over. "I'm done watching," he told the agent at the desk. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted. Zara Fields stood before the bench, her tone sharp but steady. "We are not simply evaluating a man's innocence today," she said. "We are evaluating our own." She walked slowly in front of the jury box, locking eyes with each of them. A man was arrested for standing quietly in a courthouse lobby. He was later beaten while handcuffed. His vehicle was tampered with. His name smeared. And yet, he said nothing. Her voice dropped slightly. And the silence? The silence wasn't weakness. It was his defense. It was his protest. She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, may I ask, are we here to punish Malcolm Reed? Or are we here to punish the truth for daring to survive?" The room was still. Even Maddox, seated at the far end of the aisle, shifted in his seat for the first time. Outside, protests were beginning to swell again, but this time they weren't just holding up Malcolm's photo. They were holding up signs that read, "Silence isn't guilt. We believe. Rosa accountability isn't optional." Inside the courtroom, Malcolm still hadn't spoken a word since the day he was arrested. But now his silence no longer felt passive. It felt deliberate, purposeful. And for the first time, the people watching didn't wonder why he wasn't talking. They wondered what would happen when he finally did. Because something had shifted. The system's mask had slipped, and everyone was watching to see what would be revealed next. No one expected him to stand. The courtroom was hushed, everyone leaning forward, expecting Zara to continue. But before she could open her mouth, A soft sound cut through the air, the scrape of a chair against the wooden floor. Malcolm Reed rose from his seat, still calm, still silent. Except this time he spoke. "Your Honor," he said, voice clear and level, "I believe it's time I clarify who I am." The judge blinked. The entire room froze. Even Maddox turned his head. Malcolm reached into his coat pocket slowly, so deliberately the bailiff instinctively tensed, then laid a leather badge wallet on the table. He opened it. FBI. Gasps broke across the room like cracks in ice. Zara turned, stunned. Rosa's hand went to her mouth. Jared let out a breath like he'd been holding it for days. And Dion. Dion stood up halfway, tears already filling her eyes. Malcolm looked at the judge. "I am Special Agent Malcolm Reed, assigned to the Department of Justice's Internal Corruption Task Force. 18 months ago, I was embedded under deep cover to investigate ongoing civil rights violations, falsified evidence, and patterns of abuse within the Shelby County Police Department." Dead silence. He let that settle, then turned toward the prosecution table where Salter sat already paling. "Your Honor," Malcolm continued, "I would like to submit audio evidence recorded during a private meeting between myself and Chief Salter." He pulled out a flash drive, handed it to Zara, who walked it to the bench with trembling hands. The judge inserted it into the court's playback system. The speakers crackled to life. "If we pin the gun on the kid from the east side, no one's gonna look twice. You want a conviction, you don't chase angels. You make your own devil." Salter's voice, clear as day. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged her gavel furiously, calling for order, but even her voice shook. Silence in the court. Across the aisle, Maddox was already backing away in his seat. The judge turned to the bailiff. "Place Chief Salter and Officer Maddox under arrest immediately. Charge them with conspiracy to obstruct justice, civil rights violations, and falsifying evidence." The room burst again this time, not with chaos, but with applause. Malcolm remained still as the officers led the two men away. Maddox shouted protests, his face red and wild. Salter said nothing, just stared at Malcolm like he was seeing him for the first time and realizing it was far too late. Dion made her way down the aisle, pushing through the crowd. She didn't say a word. She just walked up to Malcolm and wrapped her arms around him, her tears soaking into his shoulder. "You could have told me," she whispered. "I know," he replied quietly. "But it had to look real. Even to you." The judge, still stunned, finally spoke again. "Agent Reed, what do you ask of this court?" Malcolm looked around the room, the press, the families, the bystanders who had watched everything unfold. "I ask," he said slowly, "that we don't let this die in headlines. That we remember silence doesn't mean guilt. That truth has never needed to shout, it just needs to stand." There was no dramatic music, no cinematic fade, just the image of one man, no longer bound, no longer silent, standing exactly where injustice thought it had buried him, and turning the courtroom into a place of reckoning. They tried to hold their heads high, but justice had a different plan. As Maddox was led out of the courtroom in cuffs, his voice cracked with desperation. "We were just following orders. You hear me? We were told what to do." No one answered him. His words bounced off the walls, hollow now, like the badge he used to wear with pride. People didn't even boo him. They just stared. Some with disbelief, some with relief, and others like Dion with quiet resolve. He had humiliated a man in public. Now he was being stripped in the very same place, stripped of power, of uniform, of the illusion that he was untouchable. Salter followed next. He didn't say a word. But the real blow hadn't come yet. Later that week, 3 new lawsuits were filed against him. Families who had once stayed silent were now stepping forward, encouraged by what they'd seen in court. Malcolm's case had done something no press conference could. It made people believe speaking up was no longer a death sentence for the truth. The DOJ launched a full-scale investigation into the Shelby County Police Department. It spread like fire through dry timber. Old case files were reopened. Internal memos re-examined, promotions paused, disciplinary records once buried, unearthed. This wasn't just about one corrupt officer anymore. It was about the whole system, and it was shaking. Jared Kim didn't want the spotlight, but it found him anyway. A week after the trial, he got a quiet knock at his apartment door. 2 federal agents, not with threats but with an offer. They had seen what he'd done, risked his job, his safety, his silence. Now they wanted him on the inside helping investigate internal affairs across state lines. "You don't have to decide now," one agent said, "but we think you've already made your choice." Jared didn't say yes right away. He just nodded. Rosa didn't go back to the courthouse, not as an employee. She walked in a second time, as a witness. And this time the court was different. She sat taller, firmer. Her voice no longer shook. She testified to what she'd seen, what she'd been told to ignore, and how choosing to speak had cost her job, but brought her peace. "I always thought I was too small to matter," she said. "Turns out, I was just in the wrong system." Her words would be quoted in newspapers, blogs, and even a Senate hearing a month later. She never asked for recognition, but she got something rarer: respect. And Malcolm. He came home. For the first time in months, maybe longer, the front door didn't feel like a wall. Dion had left it unlocked, just as he asked her to all those years ago. "So you always know you can come back no matter what." He stepped inside. The house smelled like lemon and old books, like peace. She was in the kitchen, back turned, folding a dish towel, maybe pretending she didn't hear the door creak. He didn't say anything. He just walked up behind her, touched her shoulder gently. She turned. No words at first, just the kind of silence that heals instead of hurts. Then finally, he smiled. A soft, tired smile that said more than any speech could. "I'm home," he whispered. She didn't reply with words either. She just pulled him in, held on, as if letting go might undo all they'd survived. Outside, the world was still spinning. Protests were still happening. Policies were being rewritten. Names were being cleared. Truths finally carved into court records where lies once stood. But inside that little house, justice had already arrived. Quiet, steady, unshakable, just like Malcolm. It started with silence, and now it ended with a voice. Malcolm sat across from the host in a nationally televised interview, calm, poised, and deliberate. He wore the same quiet strength he had the day he'd been dragged out of the courthouse in cuffs. But this time, the world was listening. The host leaned forward. "Mr. Reed, after everything, after the lies, the threats, the betrayal, why didn't you ever break? Why didn't you speak sooner?" Malcolm paused. A long moment of stillness, and then he smiled. "Because sometimes," he said softly, "your silence isn't weakness, it's preparation." He looked into the camera, not to boast, not to punish, but to speak to anyone who'd ever been overlooked, underestimated, or silenced. "They thought they buried me, but I wasn't a corpse. I was a seed." The audience didn't clap at first. They just sat there stunned. Then a few stood, and then more, until the whole room rose with thunderous applause, not for the spectacle, but for the truth that finally had a name, a face, and a voice. Back home, another story was blooming. Dion's book hit the shelves barely 2 months later. The Man Who Stayed Silent. It was raw, honest. It didn't sugarcoat the pain or skip the nights she doubted the man she loved. She told the story not just of what happened, but of what it meant. Within weeks, it topped the national bestseller list. Book clubs read it. Colleges taught it. Even some precincts quietly passed it around like forbidden scripture. One reviewer wrote, "It's not just about justice. It's about the cost of believing in someone, when the whole world tells you not to." Rosa took a new job, another courthouse, another desk. But the walls were different now. So was she. This time, she didn't work under silence or fear. She worked under someone who understood the price of both. Malcolm had been appointed to lead the Department of Judicial Accountability within the Federal Oversight Task Force. And when he walked past Rosa's desk that first morning, no words were needed, just a knowing glance and a small respectful nod, the kind that says, "I remember." Jared's days changed too. He didn't wear a badge anymore. He wore a lanyard. Instructor, Ethics Division, Federal Police Academy. And every time a new class walked in, fresh uniforms, bright eyes, no idea what they were walking into, he started with the same story. You'll be tempted to look away, to stay quiet, to protect each other even when you know it's wrong. He'd pause, let the weight sit there. But doing the right thing, that's the real test. And the good news is, if you pass it, you don't just protect the system, you change it. The recruits always leaned in, not because it was dramatic, but because they believed he'd lived every word of it. And he had. And then there was the final image. No cameras, no speeches, just Malcolm standing alone at the new FBI field office in Atlanta, a building designed for transparency, rebuilt after the scandal. He stood in the open courtyard, morning sun pouring over the stone walls. A quiet moment. No noise, no applause. Just the wind, a few flags fluttering, and a man who had weathered the storm, and still stood tall. He closed his eyes. Inhale. Exhale. Behind him, a plaque was being installed. It read, "In honor of those who speak quietly, but carry justice loud enough to shake the walls." And beneath it, in small print, Malcolm Reed. 18 months undercover. One voice that wouldn't break. Because sometimes the seed they try to bury is the very one that grows into the forest they can't cut down. If this story moved you, you're not alone. Because what happened to Malcolm isn't just about justice, it's about the quiet strength we all carry. It's about how truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits, patient, steady, and when it speaks, it changes everything. We created Mr. Max Stories to bring voices like his to light stories that make you feel, reflect, and remember. So if this story meant something to you, please give it a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Max Stories for more powerful tales like this one. Your support means the world to us. Truly. Every view, every comment, every share, it reminds our creative team why we do what we do. And it gives us the strength to keep going. Because here at Mr. Max Stories, we believe in one thing: the truth may bend, but it never breaks. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.